when we've got. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our November session of the Earth Exchange Café. We are meeting as practitioners and philosophically and actively aligned human beings in this world, where we meet every month in our Earth Exchange Café. This is a place where we all enter our favorite cafe, the place where our favorite music, our best books, the most interesting conversations happen. It's warm, maybe there's a fire going, and you know that your favorite drink is just about to be prepared by the best barista in town. So, welcome us all to this cafe once more. And I invite you to take your drink, real or imaginary, and sit in your favorite chair as we gather round, all of us together, and prepare ourselves to listen into another beautiful conversation. And this time, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Linda Sartor into the cafe, and she and Trebi are going to be talking together. So I hand over to you, Trebi.
Thank you, Harry. That's lovely as always. Yes, we are very excited to have Linda here with us today. Linda Sartor holds a PhD in integral studies and an MS in environmental education. And she is also a faculty member in the Masters in Leadership program at St. Mary's University in California. She's been guiding programs for the group called Rites of Passage since 1997, and she trained to do so with Rites of Passage and the School of Lost Borders. Since September 11th, 2001, Linda has also been traveling internationally in the roles of unarmed civilian peacekeeper and citizen diplomat. She's the author of 2 books, Turning Fear into Power, How I Confronted the War on Terror, and the other one is called Consensus in the Classroom. Linda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start with your travel as a peacekeeper, and you made this decision to start going abroad. You were galvanized by September 11th to start going to countries where people are living in very difficult social conditions. Countries like Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of which you've been to. So I'm curious, what was it? Was it something specific that motivated you to start doing this work? Was it something that you had been thinking about over a period of time? Like, what was it that really pushed you to do something that's very, not many people do?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't something that I ever thought about. This is what I'm going to do in my future. This is what I'm going to do when I grow up. It was a calling. And I had, because of guiding the wilderness trips, and we work with people who go out to the desert to be alone and fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And in preparation for doing that, we work with people. We work with people for several days getting ready to go out and help them clarify their intentions. But also, we spend a lot of that time working with the fears that come up for people because it's kind of scary to be out overnight alone for 3 days and 3 nights in an unfamiliar place. So I had witnessed people going through the process of facing their fears, and then also in that process of being out fasting for 3 days and 3 nights, people often got in touch with voices, the spirit within their essence, their nature, that they wouldn't otherwise have contact with. And the more I watched, and I did it myself, of course, so I had the experience myself, but the more I witnessed that process, the more obvious it was to me when my inner voice was talking to me after 9/11 occurred. I'd always been a peace and justice activist, even protesting educating, and even in protesting, doing civil disobedience, which takes a little bit of facing fear. Um, but at the point of 9/11, and when I saw how the US responded to 9/11, my heart was tormented, and I was just ready to go another step. And I never liked traveling, except for on the ground. I like traveling on my feet, like backpacking kinds of travel. But traveling abroad was like not something that I enjoyed doing. The few times that I had done it weren't weren't great experiences. Um, but I was just called to say with my body that my life as a U.S. American citizen isn't any more precious than anybody else's life in the world. And so I was open to whatever came, into my awareness. So if a person here in the community where I live knew about what was going on in Palestine, in Palestine at that time, maybe not as volatile as it is right now, but probably more volatile than it has been since that time until now. I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but stuff has been going on. The U.S. is responsible for the killing um, and marginalization, just total not honoring human beings of the people in Palestine, the indigenous people of Palestine, supporting Israel in the abuse. And so it was a volatile time in April of, well, in the spring of 2002. And my friend here in the community was aware of what was going on and encouraged me to look further into that. She knew that I was open to hearing of, where my heart was calling me to be. And so that's how I ended up in Palestine in April, May of 2002. And that was the first of these sorts of trips that I was doing. And it turned out later to get what I was doing there turned out later to get a title or a label, and that's unarmed civilian protection. That's what it's being called now, UCP or UCPA, unarmed civilian protection and accompaniment. And it's being talked about in the UN. It's a possible way for there to be interventions that are nonviolent without arms that can change dynamics in places of violent conflict. And just having the presence of outsiders in these places can change it such that there's less abuse and it opens up the political space for the local peace makers and peace builders to do their work, and human rights people in these places to do their work in their way. It's not like we go to advise anybody. We go there to provide a protective presence. And so it's pretty inactive. It can be a pretty inactive thing. And sometimes it's really hard to know if we're making a difference. We just have to believe that we are. We go to places we're invited, and people will do things that they otherwise wouldn't feel safe doing and wouldn't do
So do
because
you
of
have
our
any
presence.
specific stories about that? Like a specific something that you were part of or witnessed?
Yeah, I think the best story I have happened with the Nonviolent Peace Force in Sri Lanka. And it's in my book. But this organization, the Nonviolent Peace Force, had this vision of that came out of Gandhi, um, that was having a unarmed civilian peace force in places of violent conflict, and on a large scale. And so the Nonviolent Peace Force it had its idea. They were developing infrastructure, but they weren't ready to put people in the field yet in 2002 when I was called to Palestine with the International Solidarity Movement. Um, but several years later, after I went to Iraq, then in 2000, very early in 2003, I went to Iraq, and then at the end of 2003, I got hired by the Nonviolent Peace Force to be in their pilot project in Sri Lanka. And while we were there, so we were learning what it meant. We were like learning it was a pilot project. So we were just beginning to figure out how to do this on a, yeah, and the Nonviolent Peace Force is still in existence and still doing very good work in many different places. But so this was the first year of their work. And in Sri Lanka, there's a violent conflict between the Sinhalese government and the large majority, Tamil majority. Um, and so the Tamil, similar to what I described in Palestine, the Tamil people are marginalized, abused, killed. Um, and so we were there on an island where there was that was a Tamil area, and there'd been a massacre the night before, where 11 people were killed by the Sri Lankan forces, Navy, and we were called. And while we were there the next morning, so the bodies had to stay in place until the judge came to look at them, and then they could be removed and taken to wherever they needed to be taken by the people. But so the bodies were still in place. The people were telling us their stories of what they had seen happen the night before. And it was the Navy. It was local Navy people that were Navy officers that were that were there, that came like to the house and bought cigarettes from the Tamil people. So they recognized the Navy guys and knew that that was who carried out the massacre. So when we were there, the people were out and about. The Navy and police officers were escorting the judge into the community. And so you could imagine, as soon as we saw them coming, the tension that rose in the community, and all of the women and children just filed into the churchyard, which is where we were in front of the churchyard, and the men just kind of clustered together on the side of the road. And I put myself so I was next to the men that were clustered together, but the army and the police and the judge were going to be walking past me before they walked past them. And so, and all I did was stand and smile and wave at them as they went by. And as a white woman, it just totally changed the situation, and
Wow.
all the tension just kind of dissolved in that moment. So that
That's
was when.
amazing. I mean, and that would be what you would do, that you didn't stand there like stern and
No, we were trying to
protective and
figure out
like holding a shield. You were smiling and waving. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
you were trying to figure out creative ways to just break up the energy the violent energy
Huh.
and it's oftentimes fear is what leads to violence. So in whatever way to break down the fears.
You
Yeah.
know, there's a group that I belong to where I live in Ithaca, New York, and it works to deal with racism. And one of the things that is suggested is that if you encounter somebody, and whether it's racist or somebody attacking somebody verbally or in some sort of way, you go over and you pretend that the person who's under attack is somebody that you know and you're glad to see them and how are you doing? And it's the same kind of idea,
Yeah, it
really.
is. It is.
Yeah. Well, so did you yourself have fear when you went on these different trips? And how did you, I mean, you spoke about how that your work with wilderness, rites of passage and spending time alone in wilderness was, you knew a bit about fear and how to deal with it. So what were you afraid of and how did you deal with it?
It was mostly, well, it was a lot in the months after I decided I was going to go before I actually went to Palestine. And it's really the first chapter of my book. It's all of what I went through to prepare myself. And I did. I faced fears. I faced a lot of good reasons to talk myself out of going. But that voice was relentless, saying, you've got to do this. It doesn't matter how scared you are or what might happen. And the way I had worked with people in the field who were preparing to go out, worked with them and their fears, is I would encourage them to embrace their fears, not deny them. And so get into a good relationship with the fears and learn what what the fears are trying to teach them, which for me, so that's what I realized. I have to do this with myself and my own fears. So I would go into a fear if something showed up, and think about, so what is it that I'm afraid of, and what would I do if if that were to happen, what would I do? So then I was more prepared mentally to be in fearful situations. And what I've learned by working with fears is that you don't want to deny fear, because then it has a lot more power over us. So by paying attention to what fears are showing up whenever they show up, and going into them and finding out more about what they have to teach us or what they're trying to protect us from, and then figuring out how we would deal with that situation, I mean, it's a good practice for these times right now,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of fear, and the powers of domination use fear most often, in order to keep power over. So the original name of my book was Turning Fear into Power.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that title. I like it much more
I
than the
do
main
too.
title.
But then my publisher, when we withdrew from Afghanistan, I got an interview with a local radio station, and I let my publisher know, and then he just jumped right on it, and he changed the title because he thought that Afghanistan was now going to be in the news for a while, and that it would be more likely to sell more copies. But
Oh,
I don't think, I mean, then we got, what was it that came next? Something came quite quickly after that historical event, and I don't think it helped to sell my book anymore, but that now the title is Afghanistan and Beyond, Confronting the War on Terror. So it's a different one than the one that you introduced. It's the same exact book, but it's a different title, than the one you introduced when
yeah,
we
hold
first
it back
opened.
a little so that people can see that you're standing on a tank.
Oh, okay, yeah. This is in Afghanistan. This photo is in Afghanistan, and it was a retired Soviet tank, and on the side of the road. And we were on a little field trip, out of Kabul, and we pulled over, and I climbed up on the tank, and we took the picture. It was a perfect photo op. But yeah. So
I, I don't know whether you can see this, but this is the British
Oh,
book that's available, and it is Turning Fear into Power.
yeah, yeah.
One woman's journey confronting the war on terror. Isn't that interesting?
yeah. And it's such a great photo. Harry, you've been taking notes. Do you have questions for Linda?
Well, I'm curious, you really, I love what you're saying about, and exploring what fear is actually teaching you. Have you got a story about something extraordinary or unusual or really notable that has happened either to you or when you've been witnessing somebody when they've paid attention to their fear? What have they experienced that's come out?
Well, I can't think of any one story about that, but what happened after my book was first available is I started guiding workshops for people at our local Peace and Justice Center, working with fears. And so again, it's like I would do in the field, I was doing in the Peace and Justice Center in town, where I would bring people into a memory of, or into an awareness of a fear that they're having right now. Like, first to get in touch with something that their heart is calling them to do, and then to get in touch with any fear that might be getting in the way of that. And then I worked with people on how to get into relationship with those fears and to move out of them. But again, I'm sorry, in my mind right now, I don't have any specific stories that I can tell of how that, I mean, it did definitely move people's energies and opened people up to doing what they were really ready to do, like change, like stop working, retire from the work that they were doing. That was one thing I remember happening to one person, or ending a relationship and moving on. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so I get that there's this, it is the transformational relationship that you need to explore, isn't it? It is that thing that can then change things. And going back to what you were saying about the breaking up of the energy and being creative, and then you mentioned, I think fear leads to violence. It is, what else did you notice about that kind of, it must have been a very difficult situation to be in, and that relationship to violence.
Yeah, so after that incident where the massacre occurred, and we were there at that the next morning, we did provide a protective presence in that village for several days, maybe even more than a week. Um, and they actually felt safer when we were there than the people who are supposed to be providing security for them were, and we weren't. So they asked us to be there. We stayed overnight. Sometimes I was staying with the priest in the church, yeah, in the church compound, and I was the only peace protection officer there at the time. But I knew in my body, I had this experience of feeling it in my body that that I was safe because I wasn't carrying a weapon, because people weren't afraid of me. They had no reason to be afraid of me. And I just got that, not just in the at the intellectual level, but I know it in my body that's true. Did that answer your
One
question?
thing,
Yeah, yeah.
one thing, I think you know this, Linda, but you introduced us at Radical Joy for Hard Times several years ago to the Afghan peace volunteers, and
Mm.
they participated in our annual Global Earth Exchange for I think 4 years. The first year they cleaned up in Kabul after a bomb made a lot of mess. And the next few years, they participated by working in their permaculture garden, and they would have signs that said Global Earth Exchange. And I think so often of them now, um, now that there are such harsh regulations. I've written to some of the people that you had put us in touch with and never hear anything back. And sometimes I see these photographs of the women like completely covered and wonder if those were some of those young women. It's just really, it's so sad. Are you in touch? Have you been in touch with any of them at all?
Yeah, there's a group that I'm involved with, who are working towards um, supporting peop some of the young people that were involved in that group in getting asylum. So I I'm, and we are buddies. We've got, each of us has a buddy who's in that process and has been in that process. So my buddy is in Pakistan. He's been there for almost 2 years. Um, and the group has been trying to find a place. So the group was able to place some people in Portugal in a program that they went through. Um, and I, so anyway, he's just waiting to go. So I'm in touch with him. Yeah.
No.
And I'm not sure how much how much I can really share about that, because I'm not sure how much danger any of those people are in
Uh,
now.
okay.
Mhm.
Um, oh, I just forgot what I was going to ask you completely. Do you have
I'll
anything?
maybe jump in then.
Yes.
Just what I've written down. They weren't afraid of me. I didn't carry anything, and they're not afraid of me. Now that you're not in that space, you're not in Afghanistan and Palestine. What's it like for you right now? With that feeling around you that, when people aren't afraid of me, and I live my life, um, you know, with my weapons laid down, I just wonder what after effects that sort of powerful interaction has on you now?
Right. Thank you. I have a lot of different strong feelings going on right now because of what's been going on in Gaza and the West Bank. Um, but in terms of, so when I was going through the process of getting ready to go, I looked at um, the fact that I was going because justice was more important, justice there was more important to me than my life. It was like, like how servicemen fighting for they're risking their lives for their country. And that's where I was. I was like ready to risk my life for justice in Palestine. Um, so then that's a really powerful decision to make.
Mm.
Once you know that you're not afraid to die, it's not that you're not afraid to die, but once you know that you're willing to die in doing whatever we're doing, then there's not much that can stop me. But now, and then later, as time passed and I saw different stories of different things happening in different countries, I started getting more afraid of abduction and then death. And so now I haven't really I guess I probably haven't had that fear until I haven't been going any longer, but because
Wow.
I would need to go into that fear and figure out how I would take care of myself in that situation. Um, so that's one change that I came back with. Oh, and also in the third chapter, I'm talking about between Palestine and Iraq. I felt more alive than I had remember feeling in my life. I felt like I had more of me here,
Mm.
that I was bringing forth in my life.
Mm.
And I'm not sure, what was your question? So how's it affecting me now? Yeah. And so now, I mean, now my experience in Palestine just has me so grieving so much and so angry at the U.S. about our participation in the homicide, in the genocide there
Mm.
with our tax money.
Mm.
What did you just say? What was the last bit?
With our tax
Yeah,
money,
our
like
tax
we're
money,
paying
yes.
for that.
Right. So I remembered what I was going to ask you. Of course, so Radical Joy for Hard Times is dedicated to finding and making beauty in wounded places. And, that was what we thought about when we wanted to have you come and talk to us here, because you are looking squarely in the face of really, really seriously suffering places and people, and going there and bringing bringing peace, bringing a willingness to listen, bringing a stance of simply being a protector. So, the way I think of it, it is bringing beauty to those places. Um, have you had that sense about what you're doing, that it's changing it in some sort of meaningful, positive way, making it beautiful, even in the case of like one individual person?
Yeah, I mean, um, actually, when you were talking, I was thinking about becoming aware of how amazed I am at the resilience of the people that I know in these places. And so they already have a beauty and they radiate it, like especially the Palestinians, but it's not just the Palestinians, it was the others in other countries also. Um, Whatever we can do with our presence, that can open up people's ability to bring forth their gifts into the world but again, it's like not always obvious, and it's not always obvious even to the people. But they do, ask us to come, and they do feel safer when we're present, and they, are able to do more. And they're beautiful people. So it's not like I can do anything necessarily that's going to make them more beautiful than who they already are. Mm.
Mm. Well,
Mm.
you bring a different kind of energy to the situation, which is a kind of
Mhm.
beauty, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And actually, hearing you, it's actually the bearing witness, you know, is it, and then what you said about when they feel safe in your presence, that's that kind of you're the kind of the thing that's giving them that validity and witnessing just to then shine because they are precious beings in their own right.
Mhm.
That's an incredibly powerful kind of dynamic to be in, and I totally understand um that sense of bearing witness in order to make the beauty occur, or not to occur, to flourish.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like you're expanding people's boundaries. So they have more room in which to move as themselves because you've expanded it. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I want to talk about something personal that happened to you as which you've dealt with, a wounded place and finding beauty, and did a global earth exchange yourself, and that was you lost your home in a fire. Will you tell us about that? Like what happened? Where were you?
Yeah, well, it was 2020. We were in COVID. I live in 400 on 440 acres of land in Sonoma County, close, like 10 miles from Santa Rosa, and we were hit with a wildfire. It was the third year that we had to evacuate because of other wildfires previous years, but this year it did get to us, and so I lost everything. We lost 12 out of 13 houses, and but we didn't lose some of the infrastructure of the community, like the community building and the shop and the dump truck and the tractor. It was amazing what survived this devastating fire that really took away, it burned the whole land. We have oak trees as well as Douglas fir trees. The Douglas fir trees burned up, and the oak trees survived because they're adapted to having fire, but they didn't all survive. But anyway, yeah. So I just wanted to be back here. I love this land, and each time that we evacuated, I just wanted to be back. And so as soon as I was able to get a house trailer that I could live in while we rebuilt, I did that, and I was back on the land. The fire was in September, and I was back on the land in late March. So I guess about 6 months away. And then I watched my house be built, and I got to have some say about the design, which I never expected would happen in my life, that I would be living in a house that I got to help design. And I look out here where my old house was and where my altar was that I set up for the Global Earth Exchange, the healing of, and it's again, it's like, I don't so much think of myself as a healer, as just maybe one uh, who believes in that, it might flow through me, but it's really nature is the healer, and our land is, now 4 years later. I've been in my house now for 1 year. Um, we're now using fire to make the land a healthier place. We just had a control burn heat right here. I'm looking out on the blackened area, but then immediately we had rain and grasses started coming up in the ashes. So, and we didn't, it was a low fire because it was controlled. So all the oak trees are still that made it through the first fire are still doing really well. So,
So what was it like to lose everything? I mean, it strikes me as just being a horrible thing. And a friend of mine whose sister's farm burned down a few years ago. She said she would like think of things like I need to comb my hair. Remember, she didn't have a comb, or those kinds of things. So what was it? What was it like to lose everything? Was it hard to get used to?
not for me. And I was unusual, I think, in terms of the other people in my life that I watched how they responded, how they reacted. But I think the stuff I had done in other countries and seeing homes being rebuilt and destroyed in Palestine, that's one of the things that happens there is people have, and their homes are their homes for generations. They would build homes like the family would build a home with rebar sticking out the roof so that they could add a level when their family grew and they needed another level for their children. And you can see homes that are like that still have the rebar sticking out of the roof, and then they would get their houses demolished over and over and over again. And again, they were so resilient. They would just, this is, accept it and move on. It's like, we're not going to let that stop us. We're not going to let that chase us away. So I'd seen so many people with so much less stuff than I have. And I've also been in the process of trying to go through stuff and move it on because I believe there's spirit in all things. And I felt that when something wasn't being loved and used in my house, it needed to go to somebody who would love it and use it. So just giving it to thrift stores wasn't enough because I saw how many things would sit in thrift stores that were once loved by somebody that end up in landfill. So I would sit with anything that I was looking at trying to move on. I would sit with it until I figured out who might want it more than I do, and then give it away. So it was a long, long process I was never going to get through
That's
all of
great.
my stuff. So it was like this relief to some extent that I didn't, like the decision was made for me. I wasn't making the decision to burn it. And so I could start anew and I could start with a lot more discernment about what I take into my life. So
Yeah,
That is
that's,
absolutely gorgeous, and
it is.
I've had a couple of experiences where I've sold. I've never had anything burn down around me, but I've sold an entire house, and I went backpacking with 15 kilos of stuff on my back, and that was it. And there's something exceptionally liberating about that kind of relinquishment. It's like somebody else has it, the double bed, the bedside cabinet, the computer, the kitchen table, everything just went with the house. And just for me it was a conscious choice, and I wasn't, elements didn't come to the fore to take that choice from me. And to just hear how your relationship to the stuff of your life was already mindful, was already bearing in mind the sort of the animism of that sense, and that impermanence that you were already ready to sort of be in part of, that you were already in that stream. I'm really struck by that. And yeah, just tell, how is that now? Now that you've got this house, are you still in that stream, or have you come washed ashore somewhere with a new relationship to your life, to your possessions?
well, I'm just more discerning about taking anything in. I still tend to collect, but not new thing. I've never been a consumer. And so even when I was putting, like in my community, especially in the singing group we were talking about before we opened, people wanted to help. And so they asked me to make a list of things I needed. And I asked for people just to give me used things, not to give me new things, and to not to give me anything plastic. Now, it's really hard not to take in anything plastic, but I mostly don't have plastic in my in my house. And still I see the tendency. And, sometimes you don't know that you really don't need something until you live with it, and then you realize you don't need it. But mostly now, I just don't, I'm just really more discerning about taking anything in. And the house actually that I built or that was built for me, it doesn't have a whole lot of storage. So there's not a lot of room to take much in. And most of the stuff that I've brought into my house since it was built is used. I very rarely buy anything new.
Yeah, and I suppose, sort of tagging on to Harry's question, that if you were going to places where there was already danger and where you knew you yourself could be in danger, and you made the decision to go anyway because working on behalf of peace was more important than your life. That's just not, doesn't strike me as the attitude of a person who cares a lot about stuff, like really, it sounds like I was making a joke, but it seems like it's just part of that sensibility that you bring into what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Trebi. Yeah, I mean, I strive to live my life as congruently as possible with my spirit, my essence, or my nature.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I
That
try. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that I suppose that leads in a question on that. Are you still going over to do the protective presencing work?
Yeah. So what happened is when COVID occurred, and I saw how the skies cleared up immediately afterwards when people weren't flying, I started to question my international travel. And that was, I think, one turning point in the calling. So since then, I have not gone, although I did think I would go. I did sign up for a couple of the trips that we tried to send to Palestine that didn't go for various reasons, partially because of COVID restrictions. But um, but what I ended up doing and what I'm doing now is supporting these teams in going. But I'm like, I just finished as the team coordinator for a team of five who went to the West Bank, Palestine, for the month of October, and I was supporting them, Trebi, while we were together in October. Um, from the distance, we were providing a 24/7 emergency phone that we never used. But anyway, yeah. So I was working with this team from the beginning of bringing them together, of their application process through the training and preparation, and then while they were there for the month, and then now that they're back, we're working on. It's not just me working with them, but there's a collective of us. But I was the team coordinator, um, who are now supporting them in debriefing their experience psychologically, and also for the organization, which is a Meta Peace team that I work for or work with as a volunteer. Um, but also in making presentations, because these live presentations from people who've just been there are so meaningful, especially in our society where we don't get much balanced media coverage of places like the West Bank.
So
So
are they in
yes,
the West Bank only, or are they also in Gaza?
they weren't able to go to Gaza. There's one woman who stayed on. The team is back, and she stayed on to work with our partner organization, which is International Solidarity Movement in Palestine. So she's still there. Um, yeah, and then another group I was working with earlier during COVID, we sent a team of four into Western Sahara, which again in the U.S., I didn't know anything about what was going on in Western Sahara before. But it's another one of these situations. It's occupied by Morocco, and yeah. And the women were being totally abused. They're totally resilient. They're standing up for their rights. They were being raped in front of their mother. So it was a household of three, two daughters and a mother living in a household, standing up for their rights, getting on the roof and protesting with their flag every day. And they were like on house arrest. They were oftentimes abused by the soldiers and raped in front of their mother. Was one. And as Muslim women, to be out there about that thing happening is just totally not normal. But that was their commitment to standing for their people and their human rights. And so they asked for a team to come, and we managed to get a team of four into their house for like as long as two of them stayed, as long as their visas would allow them. And then and so I was on a team back here supporting that whole. And there was one scene where we were on a Zoom with a woman who was, so the second team tried to get in, and they decided to be out there about why they were getting in. And so they weren't the first team we had to sneak in. It was like underground railroad. We had to figure out a way, and there was a whole bunch of different people working on getting them in to the house. But then the second team that went, that tried to go, were just out there while we were doing it. And on the plane when they were being deported, we were on a Zoom with them. She had the Zoom on in her pocket, so we were able to hear what was going on when she was telling the whole plane why she was refusing to sit down. I was like, wow, it's just like I was there, It's
Wow, how dramatic. That's incredible. Live action reporting. My gosh. So even though you're not going there yourself, you're still very much engaged.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one thing that helps me still feeling alive in this situation, that's really easy for me to feel resigned to, okay, so now what? What can we do that will make a difference? But yeah, this kind of stuff keeps me feeling alive.
Yeah. What
And
else are you working on? So go ahead, Harry. I can
yeah,
ask.
no, I was gonna ask, what's that like being within America right now with that kind of civilian peacekeeping ethic? You know, it's tricky right now, I'm sure. I'm coming from Britain, of course, but you know, do you find that actually your ethic and your approach is applying is applicable right now?
I think that the approach to fear is applicable, very applicable right now. I haven't been doing anything with it. I haven't been doing workshops or anything. The other stuff, I mean, and then these teams that we're able to send, I mean, I think that things are so much worse in the West Bank now than they were before. I mean, the Israeli government has armed the settlers, who are more violent than the forces, the Israeli forces. They've armed them as like a national guard, but they haven't trained them. So there's these people running around with more weapons that are attacking Palestinians on their own land. Um, and so having outsiders paying attention to that. And of course, I mean, three of our team got arrested and had to leave during that month when they were there, because Israel doesn't want people paying attention to what's going on there. And yeah, so um, what was your question? It was
If you find that in actually, your everyday life, maybe, what it's like right now in
yeah, in my everyday life is fine, just because I live in this beautiful place that I'm really connected to, and have a strong sense of place here. Um, and I'm sort of being open to, okay, what's my next calling? And it seems to be it's a call towards the powers of the divine feminine. So it's like, and feminine way is more being than doing. So, and for me, it's really hard just to practice being in this situation. And yet, that's what I'm getting. I'm supposed to be doing is being with what's going on, not going into denial about what's going on, and being with it. All I can see now is the
And let me just interrupt you and say, when you say what's going on now, like, can you just specify what you mean?
well, for me, it's about the U.S. imperialism in the world, and the many, many different places, not just Palestine, and that we have. It's because of the U.S. From my perspective and my understanding of what led us into these situations. Each of the places that I went, and there's 7 places or 6 places that I talk about in my book. I talk a little bit about the bigger picture, the history, the recent history that led to this situation. It's like I feel responsible as a tax-paying U.S. American citizen for what the U.S. is doing in the world that I think is totally wrong.
Mm.
So yeah, so I mean, and that's true for the situation in Ukraine. And that's when I first, so I went to Russia. That's not in my book. I went to Russia on a citizen diplomacy trip in 2018. and came back with a completely different view than what I ran into back here. I don't pay too much attention to media because I've always found it too overwhelming and yeah, and not doing me any good. To pay much attention. So I wasn't aware of how much our media for even since the Cold War ended has been still building up a hatred for Russia and a demonization of Putin. And my experience of the Russian people, for one thing, is they loved Americans. Um, and they were happy. They were in a better situation under Putin than they had been under Yeltsin, who was put into office in the Soviet or in Russia, um, basically by the U.S. you know. So I came back. I was planning to do presentations, which I normally did when I came back from these experiences, and I could tell by the conversations I was having with individuals in my life that I was just getting put on the defensive. I would just get defensive every time I started talking about trying to change, trying to give a different viewpoint. And that doesn't contribute to communication, you know. So I just realized I can't do a presentation about Russia. I just get too defensive, too angry about the perception that I was running into here. It was anyway, so that yes. So it's been a while now that I've been feeling resigned or just not knowing. So when I first started doing this and in the beginning after 9/11, I really felt that US citizens could make a difference. And I don't think that we can anymore. I think that the military, industrial, pharmaceutical, banking complex has control over our country and there's not much we can do except for now, people are talking about mutual aid on an individual community basis. I think we can make a difference for each other, which is what I was doing in other countries also, really making a difference for individuals, but not really making a difference in terms of all these systems that have power over humanity.
Mm. Oh, yeah, there's so much in there, from the huge to the small, back to the local, back to the individual, back to that sacred self, that you gave people the chance to feel safe enough to be beautiful. That to me, I think just the last few minutes, you've really, really rounded out what you were doing and how you now need that in just living and being in this conglomerate chaos that is all of these powers. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, and I just, I've always really admired you for putting yourself out there in the world the way you do, like just putting yourself out there in the world. I mean, a lot of us do things that we believe in, a great many of us do the things we believe in, but you believe in stuff and then you go to really difficult places and do difficult things with a lot of compassion and risk. So I just thank you. And we have to stop in a couple of minutes, but for the closing. But I just wanted to ask you what you're working on now. What are you're helping, you're supporting these peace groups from your home, your new home,
Yeah, and then well, I'm the volunteer coordinator for our local Peace and Justice Center. Um, I just took on a new volunteer pursuit with End of Life Choices California, which is giving people access to information about medical aid and dying. Um, and I'm practicing being, so I'm practicing trying just to be still, pay attention, and not be jumping into distractions. Which are, especially after this election, there's been a lot of stuff has been coming to me. It's like we need to do this, we need to do that, and it could be attractive, but then realizing, no, I need to continue breathing, being, paying attention, and with patience not knowing really what's next. Kind of always kind of being in uncertainty. And sometimes I think that's where we need to be, is in uncertainty, not expect to be able to control things, because yeah, because we really can't, and also because we probably don't know what we need to know in order to do that effectively. So
Yeah.
my heart just wants to expand into relationship, into letting love flow in all of my relationships. Yeah, and I'm an introvert. So just being with people can be a challenge, and being alone, um, yeah. So practicing being and trying to open as much as possible to letting the divine feminine spirit come through.
Well,
This sounds like good advice for everybody.
yeah,
Practicing being, practicing patience, waiting to see what's called for, being attentive. It's great. Sounds like great advice.
it is.
So
And a
Harry's
good
going to
place
take
to
us
leave.
out, and Linda, thank you so much for being with us and for doing the work you do, just persistently and consistently and from your heart.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love it when people ask me questions, because so often it's not easy to talk about myself. It's not easy
Mm.
for me to talk about myself. So when others are interested in knowing my stories, it's really helpful for me to let them flow. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're
Well,
welcome.
thank you for flowing so beautifully in this conversation, and it is, I'm sure, a benefit to all those who are going to watch this on whatever platform that they end up watching it on. So I'm going to take us out, and then Trebu, if you can tell us who's going to be in next month's session, that would be great. So to thank you all for being here and listening to Linda as she's shared her incredible experiences and given us the gift of wisdom, that is truly gratefully received. So our drinks are finished, the fire has died down, and it's time to leave the cafes. So the last person to leave turns the light out and makes sure the door is shut. And we go our separate ways back to our everyday lives, whatever they may be, but knowing that the work of Radical Joy for Hard Times and finding and making beauty in all the wounded places that are here in the world is, it's not just one person's responsibility. We are here as a community together, and that is very important to remember, especially in these difficult times. So thank you for everybody who's come along.
Thank you, Harry. And in December, I was just looking at my calendar. I can't remember. It's the 11th, the 18th. So if you can find it. But we're going to be talking to Will Falk, who is a really interesting person. He is both a lawyer and a poet. And his work is taking care of places. And his poetry comes out of his love of land and of trying to help it and protect it. So he's either the 11th or the 18th. Do you have
18th.
He's the 18th. And apologies to anybody who tried to get this on Facebook, but I am actually in Egypt today, and it wouldn't let me record on Facebook. So we normally do that. And this will be the conversation with Linda will be on our website in a week or so. So thank you all so much.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.